What's up guys, it's me Jeremy. Riot's been getting a lot closer and closer to having a very strict set of design rules that they focus on sticking to with their recent champions. A lot of the older champions are kind of just outdated when you compare them to those guidelines though. Typically these are abilities that just have a fairly unhealthy design or have some reason that could potentially cause the champion to maybe require a rework in the future to be better aligned with Riot's design philosophies. And Season 6 is the year of reworks, and I really won't expect Riot to slow down in Season 7 with their reworks either, and a lot of champions are getting reworked just left and right, and there's a few abilities that stick out as creating problems for the champions that they're on that could potentially be big enough to potentially cause the champion to get a rework or a gameplay update in the future. Keep in mind that we're also not going to include any champions that are already confirmed to be getting a significant rework, such as York or perhaps Urgot, and it's also important to understand that a lot of abilities can just entice a rework because they maybe don't fit that champion, rather than being particularly unhealthy. And as always, if you guys enjoyed the video, hit that like button, and if you don't, definitely hit that dislike, and let's get started. First up, we have Fizz's W, Sea Stone Trident. This one might be a little bit surprising to some of you because Fizz's E is notoriously one of his more annoying abilities. The problem is that Fizz's W is a huge case of what Riot calls hidden power, which is a very big thing that they've been trying to avoid recently. One of their big design philosophies is that it should really be clear where damage is coming from, so players fully understand the risks and rewards of using or playing against each champion. The damage over time effect of Fizz's W has a pretty much invisible indicator, and it doesn't deal a consistent amount of damage because of the missing HP scaling. It's important to Riot for you to be able to expect to get a certain amount of damage based on how many items an enemy has for scaling and how tanky their target is. Missing HP scaling really takes you by surprise and lets Fizz put out an insane amount of damage that you wouldn't really expect from just looking at his items. And this is the hidden power that Riot is pretty likely going to try to stomp out in the Assassin rework that might be coming in the future. We really wouldn't be surprised to see this just become a completely new ability in the future to get rid of the hidden power and let players know exactly what they're dealing with when playing against Fizz, or at the very least it needs to get a better indicator. Malphite's up next with his W Brutal Strikes. Honestly, this ability is just an example of something that is just dull and uninteresting. It causes Malphite to have a really one-dimensional playstyle where he's entirely useless outside of just using his ultimate. There's a lot of ways to build Malphite, either tanky, full AP, or even an AD bruiser build that gained popularity a little while back, but no matter what you build with him, his ground slam feels like it just deals no damage at all, and offers nothing in the way of crowd control. It's definitely not an unhealthy ability from a gameplay perspective, but having an ability that feels like it just does nothing at all makes it so much more boring to play Malphite, so we might expect to see this ability replaced in the future. The most exciting part of this ability is perhaps the bonus armor, which is pretty useful for Malphite considering he scales with armor and wants to be more tanky, but the activated side of this is just terrible. Even something like a 3-hit passive would be so much more awesome than a wave clear tool that just doesn't wave clear. The only alternative really would to maybe give it a huge buff, but Malphite is a champion that is always kind of hovering the line of being broken because of his game-changing ultimate by itself, so it's a little bit difficult to justify buffing any aspect of his kit already because it's probably going to put him in just flat out overpowered territory. At least the way Malphite is right now, you don't really need to worry about him quickly clearing a wave and then roaming to other lanes, and that'd definitely be a big issue if he had the tools to do so if his W got a buff. Next up we have Nunu's W, Blood Boil, which is an ability that is incredibly anti-synergistic and doesn't really make sense when he also has Consume in his kit. You could technically say the same for Consume as well, but in a vacuum by itself, Consume is by far a much more interesting ability that actually has a lot of strategic purpose, while his W is kind of just useless for the first 20 minutes of the game, other than letting you maybe charge your passive a little bit faster for the free ability cast. Stat boost abilities are totally fine as long as they're multi-purpose or tacked onto a solid support kit, but Nunu's W is kind of useless until the late game when it can actually be used on your AD carry. Nunu has a really interesting design and is honestly one of the kings of counter jungling, and it would do a ton for both his power, design, and overall fun if his W was changed to an ability that actually felt like it had a little bit more of an impact in the game. People often say that your job as Nunu is to make the enemy jungler even more useless than you are, and to be honest, that might actually be a pretty cool idea if Riot maybe rolled with that a little bit and gave him a new tool that properly reflects his playstyle as just an all-around pain in the ass. Mordekaiser's W, Harvester of Sorrow, is up next, and when his rework was first released, it was actually a pretty decent ability on paper. But he was pretty broken overall in release, so we ended up getting hit with some huge nerfs, and a lot of players were also kind of annoyed after the nerfs that their favorite champion had been made unplayable in his original role, now only viable as an AD carry alternative. His W received a lot of mechanics changes so that it could kind of work in both solo lanes and duo lanes, but it's honestly just ended up as a shattered mess of an ability that really just doesn't know what it's trying to do. If you play in a solo lane, you waste the passive and get a lot less effect out of the healing, but if you play in a duo lane, you're probably never going to use the minion aspect, making you a lot more dependent on having a really good support. It's not a particularly weak ability by any means and can definitely work in some scenarios, whether using it on a support or a minion in a solo lane, but it means that Mordekaiser really just always feels super clunky and lacks a true purpose in his playstyle. Riot probably needs to make a decision that will actually commit him to a single specific role so that they can turn this ability into something more positive for his kit later on. And if they want to keep him flexible and make sure all Mordekaiser players are happy, then maybe changing it into something that gives Mordekaiser a better play pattern overall could be a really cool change and would also benefit him quite a lot. Next up, we're looking at Akali's E, Crescent Slash, and there once was a time where the ability had actually a huge impact on her playstyle. But ever since the ability for it to proc the mark on her Q got removed, this ability has become something that is honestly just so unsatisfying to play with, and there's so much more room for improvement in this ability mechanics wise. A lot of the time it feels just so out of place and super clunky and just weird that it's not so much that this ability sucks, but just that it could be so much more and make Akali so much more exciting with a possible redesign on this ability, since at the moment it kind of just feels like a linear, super short range damage ability that doesn't really make that much of a difference in actual combos. The wave clear is nice, but again, that's not really what you want to be doing with Akali. You know, you want to jump in. You want to jump in and assassinate people, and this ability really doesn't contribute to that gameplay fantasy all that much, when half the time you could do as much damage with just an auto attack, honestly. I'd like to see it regain the ability to proc the mark on her E, or perhaps change to maybe just a different ability, because when Akali lost that proccing effect on her E, she became so much more clunky to play, and in my eyes, my personal opinion, a lot less fun and less fluid to play as well. This is actually one of the big reasons that Tank Akali became so popular too, as the playstyle was basically just around getting Sunfire Cape and spamming your E. And if you ever find an assassin is being played as a full tank because of one of their abilities, well, that ability probably is in need of a rework. Next on the list is actually Soraka's W, Astral Infusion. It might seem a little bit weird to say that the issue with a healing champion is their healing ability, but the problem is that healing just isn't entirely a fair mechanic by itself. Many writers have said in the past that Soraka's W is just straight up toxic design that breaks a lot of fundamental game rules, especially when it comes to attrition and just general resources, and it results in so many situations that gameplay itself is entirely balanced around being just completely thrown out the window because Soraka can just heal someone back up to full HP for free. When it comes to abilities that writers specifically complain about, Soraka's W is at the top of the list by far. However, it's also the case that Soraka's W is very core to her actual gameplay theme as a character. So even though it creates so many unhealthy gameplay patterns, it's also a very difficult ability to actually change in a rework. Soraka's received 2 reworks already trying to address this problem, and even still, it's arguably in quite a tough spot. It's going to be a long road to finding a fair way for Soraka to dish out her heals, but we don't expect Riot are quite done yet trying to narrow down the right way to do it. Our next ability is a little bit of a controversial one probably, and it's actually Body Slam, Gragas's E. This one, a lot of you guys are definitely going to disagree with me on it, and I kind of thought this for a while as well, until a conversation with Riot Gypsy Lord we actually mentioned the topic briefly. So essentially what Riot Gypsy Lord explained to me is that Gragas's E is a very limiting ability design-wise because of the interaction that it has with Flash specifically. Because of the flash body slam combo with his ultimate, Gragas will always be allowed to jump in and knock someone back into the rest of his team every 5 minutes or so, which is an incredibly overpowered move and has resulted in some very unhealthy gameplay patterns. Gragas has been hit with a lot of nerfs because of this, but he's still incredibly dependent on using that body slam properly to make him actually successful in a game. Now that said, Body Slam is an awesome ability, and it's super core to Gragas' fantasy, so this is definitely the least likely candidate for a rework on the entire list, and even if it did spark a rework, I would expect him to still definitely keep Body Slam as an ability, but maybe lose the interaction with Flash or something like that to where it's not as powerful of a combo. Like with so many other abilities, the important thing is just that every ability should have counterplay, and although it's core to Gragas' gameplay pattern, it's just not healthy when it's in its current interaction with Flash because that combo just doesn't have any counterplay when the Gragas player has some level of mechanical skill. It's honestly pretty cool that Riot does take the time to rework old champions, considering they do make way less money from doing so than dedicating that effort to perhaps new releases and new champions, but they do have a clear idea of the direction that they want the game to go, and it's important that every champion, new and old, fits that vision and doesn't conflict with their philosophies. And with that in mind, we can definitely expect a ton more reworks in the future, even if they are just maybe small scale ability swaps. So maybe you guys can think of some abilities that don't really suit the game or the champion that they're on. Definitely let us know in the comments section below, and we can maybe try and guess who might be next. That's going to be it from me. If you guys enjoyed the video, drop a like, subscribe if you want. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.